Hey, this is Mitch. We have a Tic Tac Toe game, the most basic version of it, as you can imagine, done in Playmaker. So I'm using a grid layout group. To get the 9x9 Tic Tac Toe. So all this is done in the Unity UI, and the grid layout group is pretty useful to get buttons organized in a grid, right? So I have here the 9 squares. They can be either an X or an O, and a new game button that is resets the board. And so each button has an FSM attached. Now, this can be a little tedious attaching and editing this FSM 9 times because we have 9 buttons, but this was the simplest way to set this up. You know, this is where a C# class could probably save you some time, where you write one class and then one monobehavior and attach it to an object. But here, if you want to make an edit, you either have to come up with a FSM template or just get one or two of these buttons to work, and then be confident when you're basically editing to make sure that the changes that you make are is what you want. Okay, so on start, reset the color, reset the text. So the text here is just be an X or an O. Make this interactable, and then we go into our click event. And when the click happens, we get the color and we get the string from our state, and I'll talk about this later. And then we set the color of the image to either red or green, and we set the text to either X or an O, and we send an event that there was a click. Then we mark this button as not interactable, so we can't click on it again. But even if we don't mark it as not interactable, it will still stay in this state. So even if we do click on it, we'll get the visual effect from Unity, but we're not going to be able to actually, there won't be an effect, anything from clicking. Okay, so the other two FSMs that I'm using here, the most important one is an X and an O state. So on start, the first square we click on is going to be an X, just the way I have it set up. It's always going to, the first X is going to be the first one. So we set this to X. So I have a bool value that says, is it an X? Yes, it is. We set the color to red. The cell value you can set to either 1 or -1 if you want to keep track of who wins the game. And then we set the string to X. And so every time we click on a button, you remember that on click event, that click event goes through my event distribution FSM, goes through a selector, and it selects if it's an X already, then it goes to an O. If it's not an X, it goes to an X. And if it's an O, it sets the color to green, and it sets the string to O. So this is kind of what the finished demo looks like, right? So this is it. We have and so every time we click, it changes from an O to an X. You can see on the right. That's kind of the power of Playmaker. So we're in 2 different states. As you can see, I don't have it hooked up where it determines the winner, but the one way to set this up is assign a value, let's say a +1 or -1, and then add the row, and the diagonal, and the column. I guess the column and the row and the diagonal. So there's 3 rows, there's 3 columns, there's 2 diagonals. So for example, every time you click, you run a method that will do those 8 calculations, and if you get a +3, then one person wins, and -3, meaning that there's going to be, let's say we assign a +1 to each one of these x's, we get a +3. If it was O's, we get a -3. So, but the point is that there's an FSM that keeps track of which button is going to be which, and then we have a new game button that resets the board, and the new game button simply has a very simple FSM on it. On start, we do nothing. We wait for a click. When there's a click, we send an event to the board events, reset the board. So, and I have a separate FSM that all it does, it routes the events, and I find that to be useful because it's like a switchboard, especially as the project gets bigger. So when we see an event reset the board, in this case I will just broadcast to all, because there's a bunch of individual buttons. Now you could do all these buttons on one object and do like a UI array and do some, there's many different ways to do this, I suppose. This was like the simplest one that I kind of set up in a half hour or so. And so we broadcast the event to all the buttons, and all the buttons, in addition to the start method, they have a reset the board that again just sets the color to white, sets the text to blank, and makes the button interactable. So that's pretty much it.